Welcome back to the next lesson in our Blender New Features tutorial series about Blender 2.91. My name is Helge Maus from pixeltrain. After we've seen now the user interface improvements in the last lesson, we now want to dive into the modeling features. And especially here, we want to talk a lot about modifiers and also the volume features. So let's get started directly here in an empty scene. And the first thing I want to show you is outliner related, but this time from the modeling perspective. So let's take some cubes here, nothing fancy. So we have one cube here, Shift D to make a duplicate, Shift D to make another duplicate here. And now we have three cubes here inside of our outliner. And if you now take one of these cubes, for example, this one here, and go into the edit mode, you know you can do it here by switching here in this dropdown. Also, you can press the tab key on your keyboard to switch between the edit mode and the object mode. There's another keyboard shortcut which I teach a lot. It's Control Tab, because then you get this nice menu here and you can go into every of these modes which are on an object. And I think this menu is really useful, because if you have trained a little bit your muscle memory, so to the left is the object mode, to the right is the edit mode, you can be really fast if you do something. For example, I press Command Tab and at the same moment I drag to the right. So you see I'm in the edit mode, Control Tab, and I drag at the same time to the left, and you see you can then go out here again. So it's a muscle memory thing. Maybe this is useful. It's not new, but I like it. What's new now is that in the moment you go into a mode, which is in our case the edit mode, look at this icon here. You see this mesh with this highlighted dot here. You now see that we have the same icon here inside of our outliner. So you know exactly in which object you are in which mode. Did you know that you can go into the edit mode with more than one object? Yes, you can. Sometimes you need references. For example, you want to add a bridge to something and you need to know where a point or so is. Let's test this here. If you select, for example, these two cubes here, and now go to the edit mode, you now see that we are in the edit mode for both of them. You can now really work in both of them. So you can grab here and also here. But what you are not able to do is you can't go in here and merge these two. For example, at the center, you see it doesn't work because they are not one mesh. So these functions are not possible. But like I've said, referencing of stuff is really often useful. But the cool thing here inside of the outliner is that you see that these two cubes are now in the edit mode. And now comes the nice part. If you now want to add, for example, this cube also to the list, you don't have to leave the edit mode anymore and select three of them, go back to the edit mode. You can hold down your Control key and click on this little dot here. And now you see we have all three of these meshes now in this mode. If you want to switch between edit modes because you want to work first in this object and then in this object, it's also possible. Let's first go out here. The dot is gone. You select your first cube, go into edit mode, this time with the tab key. And if you now decide that you want to go to this cube here, you can click here on this little dot without holding down the control this time. So this is now a switch which you can use to toggle between these modes here. But if you want to add something, hold down the Control key here and click onto the meshes which you want to add, and also you can leave them here. This icon also exists in other modes, but you will see that it's a little bit more limited. So if you go now here and say, let's go now to texture painting, and you see here the icon, this is the texture paint icon. You directly see here the texture paint icon. You can switch here texture painting between all of these. It's possible. But you will see that it's not possible with the Control key to add something to this texture paint mode because it doesn't seem to make sense here. So I found that in the edit mode it's possible, but in the other modes it's not possible. You see also in the sculpt mode you can switch the sculpt mode here, which is really useful if you sculpt with more than one object. But yeah, the Control key doesn't work. So I think it's a nice feature here inside of the outliner, first to see which objects you are in the edit mode and also to switch faster between the modes without going out and in again. Let's take a look into the next feature. And for this, I've prepared some scenes here. So the next feature is Sub D, or Subdivision Surfaces For this, we have a modifier. You know, if you want to add a subdivision modifier here, what you can do is you go to the modifiers, search here for the modifier and so on, and then you have to set your level. I think you know what I mean. For beginners, there's a little tip here. If you select here mesh and you know exactly which kind of resolution you later need, for example, you want a sub-D level of 3, for example, you can select the mesh and press Ctrl 3 on your keyboard. And you will see that you directly get the subdivision set here. You also see it here in this little toggle. You can change it here. And you see Suzanne has now this sub-D modifier directly on the surface. Really nice feature which is there forever, but I think it's useful to hear also about that. What's new now here? What we have here under the Advanced tab is now a whole bunch of different objects. And this is a really important one because Blender is more and more adapted into workflows and pipelines with other 3D applications, other DCCs. And so Blender needs to be compatible when it comes to Catmull-Clark subdivisions with these DCCs. You see, you can now untick here, use limited surface. You also have now here all the options which you need. And that's really nice that you really can select now these options which are exactly the same, like for example in Maya, in Houdini and so on, to have a more consistent modeling experience here. Nice thing. The next big feature here is improvements inside of the Booleans. And for this, we have this little scene here. You see, we have here a Suzanne, and also I prepared the icosphere. Let's switch here to material preview so that it looks a little bit nicer. And what I also added here is a wireframe. You can do it here. If you go here to your options, viewport overlays, you can activate here the wireframes for all of your objects in the scene. Otherwise, if you only want to have it on the object base, you can select an object, go here into the object properties, viewport display, and here you can add wireframe if you need something like that. But I like it like this here at the moment. So let's talk about Booleans. You can use Booleans directly in the edit mode, but in most cases, in my practice, I use the Booleans as a modifier. So I show you the new features in the modifiers, but you also have these features now also inside of the edit environment and also inside of the knives. But yeah, let's go now here to the modifiers. We add a Boolean modifier here to Suzanne because Suzanne should have it now. And you see here now our icon. Let's shift click here to open the whole stack because I want to go back to this Booleans all the time. And this is much faster if you click here to get this here back. So inside of the Booleans, we normally have to select first a second object. And I do that here in this field. So you can now take, for example, here this icosphere and drag and drop it into this field. This is one way of doing it. Or what you can do is you can click here and search for it if you only know the name. Or you can take this eye picker here and you can select it here or here. So let's take this guy. And the new thing here are the two solvers. In the older version of Blender, we had only this fast solver here. If you now activate that here and move your sphere into the mesh, you normally want to see now the result of your Boolean. And the Boolean is set here, intersect union difference, but to see that, we have to get rid of the visibility of this object here. There are different ways of doing that. A fast way would be, if you don't want to move it anymore, you select your sphere and press the H key, like hide on your keyboard, and then you hide it. You see the eye here is gone. If you want to bring everything which is hidden back, you can press Alt or Option H, but then you see that I have a second sphere here underneath that. So let's hide it again with the H key, or you can directly go here. Or what some people also do is you can press Alt Z for X-ray, but it's not in all these modes. Or what you can do is you can select this object. You see many different ways people are working. Then you can go to the display options of the viewport here, and then you can display as, change this, for example, to a bounce or so. So you have then the advantage that you can still grab it here and move it around, and you see then the result. Let's talk now about the Booleans. You see, if I now want to go back to the Booleans, if you have the open hierarchy, shift click here, then you can select it directly here. It's much faster to do. And yeah, I now expect that we switch to the Booleans, but this will come in the next release of Blender. So let's wait here. Okay, this is the fast mode. You see, it's really fast. It's fast working. But what you really often see in geometry is that you have many problems going on. So this was not the best mode. We have now a much better mode in Blender 2.91, which is the exact mode. You will see that the exact mode is slower because, yeah, the calculations are much better, and so it takes more time, but the result is much better. What we also have here is a mode for self-intersecting. That's really cool. And if you also take that here, you will see it takes even longer now. But yeah, it's much more stable. So if you go now here to the Zen, to some areas, you will see it solves also these here, which are not solved correctly if you deactivate self here. Really nice additions to this Boolean. But there are more things here. Let's delete here first the object. And what I then want to do is I want to bring the second icosphere up here. Let's move this guy here back and set the display back here first to the right mode. Okay, here we are. If you have worked in older versions of Blender and you had many Booleans, you had the problem that you had whole stacks of these Boolean modifiers because you want to do it over and over again if you have more than one object. So a little bit easier now in this new version of Blender, what you can do is you can make a collection out of these two icospheres. You can do it here directly inside of the outliner. So if you click here, you get a new collection. Be aware that the collection is always placed inside of the selected collection. So if you want to have it in the scene collection, click here, then you have a new collection. You can name it stencil, for example, and then you can take these two guys and drag and drop them into this collection. This is one way of working. And another way of working, which I also like, so let's delete it per right mouse button, is you can select these two elements here, press the M key over your viewport. M means move to collection, and then you have all the collections here as a menu, and you can add here collection by clicking here plus new collection. Then we name it stencil, for example, press the enter key, and now these two objects are inside of a stencil collection. Let's go back to our Boolean here. And what we now can do, also new here in this version of Blender, is we can now change the type here to collection. And then you see the collection icon here, and I take now this stencil and bring it into this list. We have still the exact mode. You see it takes a while. And now we can deactivate the visibility of this stencil collection. And look at that. You have now a nice Boolean result. So I think the new Boolean mode is a really cool addition here, and I like it a lot. And I think it's a really cool idea to have both options here. So if you want to use that here in your daily practice, you still can decide if you need more quality or it's absolutely enough to work with the old solver. Let's go into the next scene here, which is my volume scene. We had volumes since the last version of Blender, but we now have new features. I have switched on here cycles, and I go down in my viewport to 16 samples, and I also activate adaptive sampling here, and then we can go here. So to see that I also have light sources going on here in my yellow colored lighting collection, and we have a Suzanne here, which we want to use now. The first thing I want to show you now is a new modifier, which is named Mesh to Volume Modifier. For this, we first need a volume. So if you go to the Add menu, you have here your volumes. Like I've said, we had this in the last version. We can import an OpenBDB if you have cached it out, for example, from your MantaFlow, or you bring it in from Houdini or anywhere else. Or you can say, give me an empty one. And now the empty one is placed somewhere. And one thing which I have to learn is select the right collection. So I drag it out here. Now we have it here. This here is now our new volume here. it's empty. So if you move it to the side, you only see an origin point here, that's all. And if you go now here to the settings of this grid, you see it's empty. You have here a VDB link if you want to load something into that here. But yeah, it doesn't make sense at the moment here. But what we're now able to do, and that's the cool thing, you have now your first two modifiers on the volume object. I'm on the volume object here. I go to the modifiers, and if you open this up, you have a generate modifier and a deform modifier. And these are both new. So let's first add to this empty volume a mesh to volume modifier here. And now you can select an object, which is in our case Suzanne. And one thing which is a little bit strange at the first click is that you will see that the position here of this volume hook is not used. But it makes absolutely sense, because if you have a big scene and you have placed your meshes exactly where you want to have them, they are converted to the volume exactly at the place where these mesh parts are. But we can't see them. Why? Because Suzanne is over it. You see, if I move here my mouse, it's flickering around here because Suzanne is in the way. Let's click Suzanne here, and it's important that you really click on Suzanne and not these boxes which are helping the volume, and then press the H key. And now you see that here is a volume going on. For seeing it better, there are different ways of doing it. You can select your volume here, go here into the volume settings. There's a density which you can bring up, so it's more dense, but you see it's not really nice here. What I now do is I switch here to my cycles representation, and you see if you have light sources, it looks much, much better. So this here is our volume. You see here is an image of Suzanne, but it doesn't look too well because we have these stair steppings here. And the reason for this is the voxel size. Every volume is represented in a three-dimensional grid, and in every of these grids you have voxels. These are little cubes, and the size of these cubes tell the volume which resolution you get, and this resolution here is really low. If you now look into the volume settings where you normally would expect to see these settings, you don't see anything. We have to go into the modifier which generates this volume. And if you go now here, you have again your density, and this was the density I was searching for. You see, now it makes sense, because now you tell every voxel how dense the volume inside of this voxel now is. You can make it more dense or less dense. You also find here the options how you want to work. It's an SDF, it's a signed distance field, so you normally have an exterior and interior band. You also have the option that you fill the volume. If you deactivate that, you only get a band around the hull. You see now Suzanne inside is hollow. Yeah, it's only the surface. But if you want to fill it, you can click here and only the external band. Something you can do. And if you now want to get rid of these stair steppings, you go here to the voxel amount. Voxel amount means how many voxels you have on this side here. I don't think in the side length. I think it's much better to talk about the size of the voxels. So I go here to the resolution mode, change it to voxel size, and now you can exactly tell how big the voxels are. They are cubes, so you have now 0.1 unit. And it looks a little bit better, and then you can lower this value. Be careful. The more or the finer these voxels are, the bigger the scene or the grid gets, and the slower it gets. If you lower the voxel, remember that you have 3 axes for these voxels. So it's a cube, yeah, and this means a lot more voxels to calculate. Now you see we have a value which we maybe like. And if you later want to work in rendering, you can also bring this down a step more. And the next thing we now want to do is we want to look into the next modifier here. We have 2 modifiers now on the volumes. And the next modifier here is the volume displacer. For example, you want to build nice Suzanne clouds in the sky. You can sculpt them, for example, or make a mesh like this here, and you say this is a cloud, but it looks still too uniform. And you know displacement from polygons, and the same thing you can do now on volumes. So for this, we make a volume displacer here, and you see now you displace with the help of a texture, which you add here. You can click here new, and what happens at the moment here, you get a texture slot, which we can name, for example, Displacer. And the question is, what is this texture? For this, you have to go into the texture properties, or you can click here this button, which also brings you here to the texture in the texture area. And this displacer now here can be built through different types. You can load an image or movie. For this, we have here loader, which you can load here or paint it by yourself, or you can go into these generators and select one. And let's take, for example, a musgrave. I think this works really well. And if you now take this, you now see that this noise pattern here starts to displace this mesh. And now you can start playing here with all the settings or different kind of Perlin noises and so on. But I think you see what we can do with that. It's a real displacer. So let's go back now into the modifiers, and now you can see that you have here now the strength and also the mapping and how it is working through the voxels. So if you go here to 1, you see the displacement is much stronger now. And yeah, maybe that's exactly what you're after. One question which came when I showed it before was, what is this here? This is a representation of the viewport display. If you go here, you see there's a wireframe, which is boxes at the moment. You also can have points. So now you have points here. And if you want to get rid of this funny thing, you can click here to none, and you only get this outside box here so that you know where this volume lives. After we've now built volumes and played with them, like I've said, you can use this volume displacer also with volumes which you load in from VDB, from your simulations inside of Blender or from anywhere else. What you now can do is we also have a new modifier inside of the mesh world, because now we are able to bring this thing here back into the polygons world. And for this, we need a polygon mesh. So make sure that you are in the scene collection again, and then we make Shift A here a mesh. It's not important which kind of mesh you build, because this is only a placeholder for your modifier. So I add it here, and I say this is placeholder. Okay. And then we go here to the modifiers, and if you now look here through all of these, you will find a new modifier with the name Volume to Mesh. And if you select that, we have to tell now the system where's the object, or better to say where's the volume which you want to use. In our case, this is volume. Drag it in, and now I can deactivate the visibility of this volume. And now you see we are back in mesh world. Press Alt Z to go out here of my X-ray mode again. So this mesh is not very fine at the moment. What you have now in this new modifier is first the smooth shading. It's the same like right mouse button here, shade smooth, but this here is inside of that, which makes it nicer, I think. Then we have now the resolution of that, and at the moment it uses the grid, which means the voxel grid which you had in your field. But you can change that again, so we can have a voxel amount or the voxel size, which I prefer. And now you see we had a voxel size of 0.05, I think. So let's take the first one, and then you see the same result like before, because yeah, this is exactly the resolution of the grid. But what you also can do now is you can lower this value to get more resolution here, and you see how that here looks. Let's go a little bit deeper. Okay, that was not what I'm after. Okay, that's exactly what I want. And what you also can do now here is you can change it here to an adaptive mode, because at the moment everything is the same. One would be it's fully adaptive. You see that some of these areas have bigger polygons where we don't have too many details, and other areas have more resolution here. That's the idea behind adaptivity. So you don't have to use the same polygon amount everywhere. So I go back here to 0. And the last thing I want to talk with you about is the threshold here. The question is, what is a threshold? If you think about your voxels and you have a density in every of these voxel cells, the density is everywhere different. And you have to decide, if you mesh that, how dense a cell has to be seen as solid, so which is inside of that. If you go here to the threshold lower, you will see that you get a more blob. If you get this higher, you get less and less mesh, because not all cells are filled with 0.9 density. So this is also a value which can be useful if you are remeshing your volumes. You see the reset to default doesn't work here too well, so I type it in by hand again. Okay, these were the additions to the volumes world. The last thing for this lesson here is an addition into the so-named Ocean modifier. For this I prepared only a grid here, nothing fancy. The Ocean modifier is here for a while. It's using the Houdini Ocean toolkit, which is open, and so Blender has added it some time ago. Inside of the Ocean modifier, what we are now able to do, and this is really nice, we can now change the resolution for the viewport and the renderer independently. And this is really important, because later in production you want to have much finer details here. And if you now take a look here, let's switch the rendering on. Okay, now we have it. Let's go here and switch it to cycles. Yeah, now we can see something, and let's get rid of the wireframe. You now see that we don't have too many details here on the grid. What we are now able to do, the first thing I do is I go into the waves here and change the scale of the waves a little bit more so that you can see it better. Yeah, but you still see we don't have too many details. To get these details, what we are able to do then is we can push here the render resolution a little bit up here so that we have even more details if we final render. Nice features also here. I think that's enough for this tutorial about modeling features, volumes and modifiers. I will make another new features tutorial about Blender 2.91, which is talking about curve modeling, but I think that's enough. I hope you like this video. If you like it, please subscribe, give me a thumbs up. If you have questions, please write them in the comments below. I'm Helge Maus from pixeltrain. Have fun with Blender.